The chalk hit the board so hard it shattered. Pieces scattered across the floor like broken promises. Professor Hartwell didn't even notice. He was too busy writing an equation that had destroyed careers, ended PhD programs, and humbled some of the brightest mathematical minds in the country. His hand moved with practiced arrogance, each symbol a weapon. This wasn't teaching. This was a public execution. Isaiah Parker stood in the back row watching. 19 years old. Sophomore. Silent. Everyone in that lecture hall, 73 students, every single one, turned to look at him. Some faces showed pity. Others showed relief that they weren't the target. A few showed something worse, agreement. "Look at this equation," Hartwell announced, stepping back from the board. "This is a modified Diophantine problem involving elliptic curves and modular forms. Mathematicians with 30 years of experience have failed to solve variants of this." He turned, his eyes locked on Isaiah with the kind of cold certainty that comes from never being challenged. "But you're going to solve it. Right here. Right now. Show us all why the admissions committee made such a progressive choice." The word progressive dripped with venom. Isaiah's grandmother had told him once, sitting in her kitchen on a Tuesday night, "Baby, the world will test you not because they want to see you succeed, but because they're terrified you might." She'd said it while folding his scholarship acceptance letter, her hands shaking with pride and fear. She'd known something Isaiah was just beginning to understand. Excellence wasn't protection. Sometimes it was a target. The lecture hall was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Professor Hartwell crossed his arms, waiting. He'd done this before, not this exactly, but versions of it. Little humiliations disguised as academic rigor. Questions designed to destroy confidence. Challenges meant to remind certain students that they didn't belong, that they were visitors in a world that would never truly accept them. But here's what Professor Hartwell didn't know. Here's what he couldn't have possibly imagined. Isaiah had seen this equation before. Not this exact formulation, but the underlying structure, the hidden pattern, the elegant trap built into its design. He'd seen it 3 years ago, in a notebook. A very specific notebook. What would you do if you knew the answer, but showing it would change everything? Would you stay invisible, or would you step into the light knowing you could never go back? Isaiah took one step forward, then another. The distance between the back row and that chalkboard felt like miles. Every eye in the room tracked his movement. Hartwell's smile grew wider with each step, a predator watching prey walk into a trap. But something in Isaiah's posture shifted. His shoulders straightened. His pace became steady, purposeful. And for just a moment, so brief you might have missed it, Professor Hartwell's smile faltered. Because Isaiah Parker wasn't walking toward that board like a victim. He was walking toward it like someone who'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. What was in that notebook? And why would it terrify a tenured professor? Let me take you back 4 years. Because to understand what happened in that lecture hall, you need to know where Isaiah Parker came from. Not the sanitized version. Not the inspirational movie script. The real story. Isaiah grew up in Eastwick, a neighborhood where sirens were the soundtrack and survival was the curriculum. His mother worked double shifts at St. Mercy Hospital, overnight nurse, the kind of job that ages you in dog years. His father wasn't in the picture. Not dead, not absent by tragedy. Just gone. The kind of gone that doesn't come with explanations or closure. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked maybe twice a month. 3 rooms. Paper-thin walls. In winter, they piled on blankets because the landlord's idea of heat was a suggestion, not a guarantee. Isaiah did his homework at a kitchen table that wobbled, under a light that flickered, with the sounds of his neighbors' lives bleeding through the walls. But Isaiah had something. A gift. A curse. Depends on who you ask. Numbers made sense to him in a way that nothing else did. While other kids saw math as a chore, Isaiah saw it as a language, elegant, precise, honest. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't judge. They didn't care what zip code you lived in or what color your skin was. 2 plus 2 was for whether you were in a penthouse or a project. When he was 13, his grandmother, his mother's mother, a woman named Dorothy Parker who'd raised 5 kids on a seamstress's salary, called him over one Saturday morning. She'd been cleaning out her attic, sorting through decades of accumulated life. She handed Isaiah a cardboard box covered in dust. "These belong to your grandfather," she said quietly. "Thought you might want them." Isaiah had never known his grandfather. The man died 2 years before Isaiah was born. Heart attack at 57. But here, in this box, were pieces of him. And among the pieces, wedged between old photographs and faded letters, were 7 notebooks. Composition notebooks, the cheap kind with the marbled black and white covers. If this story is different, subscribe now, because what Isaiah found in those notebooks would change everything, and you need to see where this goes. Isaiah opened the first notebook that night. The handwriting was small, precise, obsessive. Page after page of mathematical equations, proofs, theorems, problems. Not homework, not classwork. This was exploration, pure mathematical thought, complex analysis, number theory, abstract algebra, graduate-level mathematics written by a man who, according to every family story Isaiah had ever heard, worked in a factory his entire adult life. His grandmother noticed him staring at the notebooks the next morning, his eyes red from reading all night. "Your grandfather was brilliant," she said softly. "Taught himself everything from library books." Back then, colored folks couldn't just walk into universities. He tried once, applied to 3 schools. Never heard back from any of them. She paused, her voice catching. He used to say math didn't care what the world thought of him. The math was pure. Isaiah spent the next 2 years working through those notebooks like they were sacred texts. He taught himself topology, real analysis, and complex variables. He learned to see problems the way his grandfather saw them, not as obstacles, but as puzzles waiting to be unlocked. By 15, he was solving competition-level problems. By 16, he was tackling graduate-level material. But he never told anyone, not his teachers, not his classmates, not even his mother. Because Isaiah understood something crucial. Being smart while black wasn't celebrated everywhere. Sometimes it was suspicious. Sometimes it was threatening. Sometimes it painted a target on your back bigger than any scholarship could protect you from. So he played the game. B+ average. Solid but unremarkable. Smart enough to get into college, not threatening enough to attract the wrong kind of attention. He took the SAT once, scored high enough for scholarships, and applied to Whitmore University because they offered him a full ride, and it was far enough from home to feel like a fresh start. But here's the twist, the thing nobody at Whitmore knew, the thing that would have changed everything if they had. One of those 7 notebooks, the 5th one, contained something extraordinary. A proof. An original proof to a problem that had remained unsolved for decades. His grandfather had cracked it 40 years ago, alone in an attic, with no one to share it with, no one to validate it, no one to care. Isaiah had verified the proof himself. It was flawless, elegant, revolutionary. And the equation Professor Hartwell just wrote on that board? It was a variation, a simplified, modified version of the exact problem his grandfather had solved. How would it feel to hold the answer to a question designed to humiliate you? Would you stay quiet, or would you burn the whole system down? Isaiah's hand touched the chalk. The texture was familiar, dusty, brittle, real. Professor Hartwell stood 3 feet away, arms still crossed, that smug smile plastered on his face like a mask he'd worn so long it had fused with his skin. The other students leaned forward in their seats. Some had their phones out, not even hiding it. This was going to be a moment. They could feel it. They just didn't know what kind. "Whenever you're ready," Hartwell said, his voice dripping with false encouragement. "Take your time. I know this is significantly above your level." Isaiah stared at the equation. Lines of symbols stretched across the board, variables dancing with exponents, Greek letters woven between algebraic structures, a problem that looked like chaos to most people. But to Isaiah it was a map. He could see the pathway through it, the elegant route from question to answer, the hidden structure underneath the complexity. His grandfather's handwriting flashed in his mind. Page 47 of the 5th notebook. The proof sprawled across 6 pages, dense and beautiful. His grandfather had approached the problem from an unconventional angle, using a technique that wouldn't become mainstream in academic mathematics for another 20 years. The man had been ahead of his time, working in complete isolation, driven by nothing but pure love of the work. Isaiah picked up the chalk. His hand moved. Not quickly, there was no need to rush. He wrote the first line of his approach. Then the second. Professor Hartwell's smile twitched. By the 3rd line, the smile started to fade. By the 5th, it was gone completely. "Wait," Hartwell said, stepping closer. What are you? Isaiah didn't stop. His hand moved with quiet confidence, each symbol placed with precision. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't grandstanding. He was just solving the problem, step by methodical step, using an approach that was simultaneously unconventional and undeniable. A girl in the second row gasped. She saw it, the moment when Isaiah's method revealed the underlying pattern. A guy near the front whispered, "Holy shit." More phones came out. The energy in the room shifted from anticipation to disbelief. Professor Hartwell's face had gone pale. He stepped closer to the board, his eyes scanning Isaiah's work with growing horror. "This isn't, you can't just," his voice trailed off. Because Isaiah could. Isaiah was. The room was electric now. Students were standing up to see better. Someone whispered, "Is he actually solving it?" Another voice answered, "I think he already did." Isaiah stepped back. The proof was complete. 15 lines. Elegant. Irrefutable. He set the chalk down on the ledge beneath the board, and the small click of chalk on metal was the loudest sound in the universe. Have you ever watched someone realize they've made a terrible mistake? Have you ever seen the exact moment when someone's certainty crumbles and they understand they've underestimated everything? Professor Hartwell stared at the board. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Isaiah, then back at the board, then at Isaiah again. The man's entire worldview was rewriting itself in real time, and it was destroying him. "Where did you?" Hartwell's voice was barely a whisper. "How did you?" Isaiah met his eyes. And for the first time since walking into that classroom on the first day of the semester, Isaiah Parker spoke directly to Professor Hartwell. His voice was calm, steady, and absolutely devoid of emotion. "You asked me to solve it. I solved it." The silence that followed was deafening. 73 students were holding their breath. A tenured professor unraveling, and a 19-year-old kid from Eastwick standing in front of chalkboard, holding all the power in the room. But here's the thing about power. Having it and knowing what to do with it are two very different things. What do you think Isaiah should do next? Walk away? Press the advantage? Tell me in the comments what you would do. The lecture hall door opened. Everyone turned. A woman in a gray suit stepped inside, someone from administration, someone official. Her eyes scanned the room, landed on Professor Hartwell, and her expression was ice. "Professor Hartwell," she said calmly, "we need to speak. Now." What happened next would become the most talked about incident in Whitmore University history. But to understand the earthquake, you need to understand the fault lines that were already there. Professor Jonathan Hartwell wasn't just any professor. 23 years of tenure, 6-figure salary, published author. His textbook on advanced number theory was used in universities across the country. He sat on academic committees. He wrote recommendation letters that could make or break careers. He had power, the kind that's invisible until you bump against it. But power like that doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's protected, maintained, reinforced by systems designed to preserve it. The woman in the gray suit was Dr. Patricia Vance, Associate Dean of Academic Affairs. She'd been on campus for 11 years, and in that time, she'd heard rumors about Hartwell. Little things. Comments from students that never quite crossed into formal complaints. Whispers from other faculty about his teaching style. Nothing actionable. Nothing concrete. Just a pattern of behavior that lived in the shadows, never quite documented enough to matter. Until today. Because 3 students in that lecture hall had recorded the entire incident. From the moment Hartwell singled Isaiah out to the moment Isaiah completed that proof, everything was captured. Video, audio, context. Within 15 minutes of a class ending, those videos were uploaded, shared, and spread across campus social media like wildfire. By the time Dr. Vance walked into that lecture hall, the situation had already exploded beyond her ability to contain it. The videos had been viewed thousands of times. Students were tagging the university's official accounts. Alumni were calling the development office. News outlets were already reaching out for comment. Hartwell followed Dr. Vance out of the lecture hall in stunned silence. The students erupted the moment the door closed behind them. Everyone is talking at once. Isaiah stood at the front of the room, still by the chalkboard, surrounded by classmates who suddenly saw him differently. "Dude, that was insane," someone said. "How did you even?" I've never seen anyone solve that kind of problem that fast, another voice chimed in. A girl named Rachel, who sat 2 rows ahead of Isaiah's usual spot, pushed through the crowd. Isaiah, right? We've been in this class all semester, and I don't think I've ever heard you speak. Her eyes were wide with genuine curiosity. Where did you learn to do that? If you're realizing this story is going somewhere unexpected, hit that subscribe button, because the next few parts are going to show you exactly how one moment can dismantle an entire system. Isaiah didn't know how to answer. How do you explain notebooks in an attic? How do you explain a grandfather you never met who taught you to see the world in equations? How do you explain years of deliberate invisibility, of calculated mediocrity, of survival strategy, disguised as academic performance? I just studied, Isaiah said finally. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The crowd around him buzzed with energy, but Isaiah felt distant from it, detached, because he knew something they didn't. He'd just made himself visible in a way he could never take back. Every survival instinct his grandmother had taught him was screaming that he'd crossed a line. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. This is Marcus Chun. I'm a senior in the math department. Everyone's talking about what happened. You okay? Another buzz. This time from a university email address. Subject line, academic inquiry, response requested. Then another, and another. His phone became a strobe light of notifications. Isaiah left the lecture hall through a side door, avoiding the crowd. He walked across campus with his hood up, hands in his pockets, trying to process what he'd just done. The autumn air was cold. Leaves crunched under his feet. Everything felt surreal. He ended up at the library, 3rd floor, in a corner study room where nobody went. He sat down, pulled out his phone, and finally opened the email from a university. It was from the dean's office, requesting his presence at a meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Subject of the meeting, Incident Report and Academic Integrity Review. Isaiah's stomach dropped. Academic Integrity Review. They were questioning whether he'd cheated, whether his solution was legitimate, whether he, a 19-year-old black kid from Eastwick, could possibly have solved a problem that had stumped people with PhDs. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to scream. Instead, he just sat there, staring at his phone, feeling the weight of what he'd always known. Excellence wasn't protection. Sometimes it was just a different kind of target. His phone rang. His grandmother. He answered. Baby, her voice came through, warm and worried. Your mama just called me. Said people are talking about you all over the internet. Said you did something in class. You okay? Isaiah closed his eyes. Grandma, I think I made a mistake. What kind of mistake? I stopped being invisible. There was a long pause. Then his grandmother said something that would stick with him forever. Baby, your grandfather spent his whole life invisible. Died with all that brilliance locked up in notebooks nobody ever saw. Maybe invisible ain't living. Maybe it's just a slower kind of dying. Could you carry the weight of someone else's dreams? Could you risk everything to prove you belong in a space designed to exclude you? The meeting room was sterile. White walls, long table, 6 chairs. Isaiah sat on one side alone. Across from him, Dr. Patricia Vance, Professor Hartwell, and 2 people Isaiah didn't recognize, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a woman taking notes on a laptop. The silver-haired man introduced himself as Dr. Raymond Foster, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. The woman was from the university's legal team. That detail, the presence of a lawyer, told Isaiah everything he needed to know about how serious this had become. Mr. Parker, Dean Foster began, his voice measured and formal. Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice. I want to be clear that this is an informal inquiry, not a disciplinary hearing. We're simply trying to understand what happened yesterday in Professor Hartwell's class. Isaiah glanced at Hartwell. The professor looked diminished somehow, like he'd shrunk overnight. His tie was crooked. He wouldn't make eye contact. I understand, Isaiah said quietly. Dr. Vance leaned forward. Isaiah, the work you produced on that chalkboard was remarkable. Genuinely impressive. But it's raised some questions. The approach you used, the methodology, it's not something typically taught at the undergraduate level. Can you help us understand where you learned it? There it was. The polite accusation wrapped in curiosity. They wanted to know if he'd cheated, if he'd somehow accessed solutions beforehand, if there was an explanation that made more sense than a kid from Eastwick being that good. Isaiah pulled out his backpack. From it, He removed something he brought specifically for this moment, the fifth notebook. His grandfather's notebook. 40 years old, pages yellowed, handwriting faded, but still legible. He set it on the table between them. My grandfather wrote this, Isaiah said. He taught himself advanced mathematics working factory jobs in the 1970s and 80s. He never got to go to college, never got recognized for his work. But he was brilliant. Isaiah opened the notebook to page 47. The problem Professor Hartwell put on the board? My grandfather solved the original version decades ago. What I did was apply his method to a modified form of that problem. The room went silent. Dr. Vance picked up the notebook carefully, like it was something sacred. She scanned the pages, her eyes widening. She passed it to Dean Foster, who did the same. This is, Foster struggled for words. This is extraordinary. If this work is original, if it's legitimate. It's legitimate, Isaiah said firmly. I've verified every step. I've spent years working through these notebooks, teaching myself, building on his foundation. I didn't cheat. I didn't plagiarize. I learned from my grandfather, even though I never got to meet him. What would you sacrifice to honor someone who never got their chance? Drop a comment. I need to know if you feel this. Professor Hartwell finally spoke, his voice hollow. I didn't know. I had no idea. You didn't ask, Isaiah cut him off. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. You saw me and made assumptions. You decided who I was based on how I look, where I come from. You wrote me off before I ever wrote a single equation. Hartwell's face flushed red. That's not, I never. There's video, Dr. Vance said quietly. Multiple videos. From multiple students. We've reviewed them. She looked at Hartwell with something close to disgust. Your comments were unacceptable. Discriminatory. Hostile. The university takes these matters very seriously. The lawyer's fingers flew across her keyboard. Dean Foster rubbed his temples. Isaiah sat still, watching the system reckon with itself. Mr. Parker, Foster said finally, on behalf of the university, I want to apologize. What happened in that classroom should never have occurred. Professor Hartwell's behavior was inexcusable. He paused. We'll be conducting a full review. But I want you to know, your academic standing is not in question. Your integrity is not in question. And we want to support you moving forward. Support. The word felt hollow. Because where was this support when Isaiah was sitting in the back row, invisible? Where was it for his grandfather, who died never knowing if his work mattered? But Isaiah nodded. Thank you. The meeting ended. As Isaiah stood to leave, Dr. Vance touched his arm gently. Isaiah, wait. Can we talk for a moment? Just the two of us. The others filed out. The lawyer whispered something to Hartwell that made his face go ashen. When the room was empty except for Isaiah and Dr. Vance, she closed the door. I need to be honest with you, she said. This situation is complicated. Professor Hartwell has powerful allies. Alumni connections. Academic networks. The university is going to face pressure, significant pressure, to protect him, to minimize this, to make it go away quietly. Isaiah's jaw tightened. So that's it. He gets a slap on the wrist, and everything goes back to normal. I didn't say that. Dr. Vance's eyes were sharp. I'm telling you, there's going to be a fight. And if you want justice, real justice, not just an apology in a closed room, you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to be willing to go public, to tell your story, to stand up even when people try to tear you down. She paused, studying him. The question is, are you ready for that? Because once you start down that road, there's no going back to being invisible. Was she offering help or a warning? And what would choosing visibility cost him? Isaiah walked out of that meeting into a campus that had transformed overnight. Everywhere he went, people stared. Some looked at him with admiration, others with suspicion, a few with outright hostility. The videos had gone viral beyond Whitmore. They were on Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, Instagram. News outlets were picking up the story. Professor humiliates black student, gets proven wrong immediately, was trending. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing in 18 hours. Messages from people he hadn't talked to since high school. Friend requests from strangers. Interview requests from journalists. 3 separate documentary crews wanted to tell his story. Someone started a GoFundMe for him without his permission and had already raised $40,000. Isaiah felt like he was watching his life happen to someone else. Like he was a character in a story he hadn't agreed to be part of. He tried to go to his afternoon class, differential equations, a course he actually enjoyed. He walked in, took his usual seat in the back. But this time, everyone turned to look at him. The professor, Dr. Helen Martinez, paused her lecture mid-sentence. "Isaiah," she said warmly, "it's good to see you. How are you holding up?" The question, asked in front of 30 students, felt like a spotlight. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "Sorry for being late." "You're not late, and you're welcome here." She said it with emphasis, like she was making a point to the entire room. "Let's continue." But the rest of the class was torture. He could feel eyes on him constantly. During a break, 3 students approached him. One of them, a white guy named Tyler who'd never spoken to Isaiah before, said, "Dude, what you did was legendary. Hartwell's a dick. Everyone knows it." Another student, a South Asian girl named Priya, added, "I heard they're putting him on administrative leave. Is that true?" Isaiah didn't know. He didn't know anything beyond what had happened in that meeting room. If this story is pulling you in and you want to see how it ends, subscribe now, because the system is about to show its true face, and what happens next will shock you. After class, Isaiah went back to his dorm. His roommate, Jason, a business major who spent most of his time playing video games, looked up when Isaiah entered. "Yo, you're famous," Jason said not unkindly. "My mom texted me about you." "My mom? Who doesn't even know what TikTok is?" Isaiah collapsed on his bed. This is insane. Is it insane that it happened, or insane that people care? Both. His phone rang again. This time, it was a number with a New York area code. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Isaiah Parker?" A woman's voice, professional, energetic. "Yes." "Isaiah, my name is Janelle Morrison. I'm a producer with Real Stories Network. We're a documentary production company, and we'd love to talk to you about your experience. What happened to you is part of a much bigger conversation about race, education, access, and—" Isaiah hung up. He didn't want to be part of a bigger conversation. He just wanted to solve equations in peace. But peace, he was learning, wasn't an option anymore. That evening, Isaiah received an email from an address he recognized immediately. Professor Emeritus Dr. Leonard Ashford, one of the most respected mathematicians in the country. Isaiah had read Ashford's papers, studied his proofs. The man was a legend. The email was short. "Mr. Parker, I saw the video. I'd like to see your grandfather's notebooks. If his work is what you claim, it deserves recognition. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." Isaiah stared at the email for 10 minutes. This was it. Validation. Recognition. The thing his grandfather never got. Someone who mattered was taking him seriously. He replied, "Professor Ashford, I'd be honored to share my grandfather's work with you. When would you like to meet?" The response came back within 5 minutes. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. My office. Bring everything." Isaiah felt something shift inside him. Maybe this nightmare had a purpose. Maybe his grandfather's brilliance would finally see the light. Maybe stepping into visibility had been the right choice after all. But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something much bigger and more dangerous than he understood. Forces were moving around him, institutional forces, social forces, forces that had their own agendas. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind, "Maybe invisible ain't living." But what if being visible meant becoming a symbol instead of a person? What if the world wanted to use his story without caring about him? Could you trust the system to do the right thing, even after it showed you who it really was? Professor Leonard Ashford's office was everything Isaiah imagined it would be. Wall-to-wall bookshelves crammed with mathematical texts, framed awards, photographs with famous academics. A chalkboard covered in equations that looked like art. The smell of old paper and coffee. Ashford himself was 73, black, silver beard, eyes that missed nothing. He'd been one of the first black tenured mathematics professors in the Ivy League back in the 1980s. He'd fought battles Isaiah was only beginning to understand. "Sit," Ashford said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Show me what you've got." Isaiah placed all 7 notebooks on the desk. Ashford picked up the 5th one, the one with the proof, and began reading. Silence filled the room. Minutes passed. Ashford's expression didn't change, but his eyes moved rapidly across the pages, absorbing, analyzing, verifying. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ashford set the notebook down. He looked at Isaiah with an expression that was equal parts sadness and awe. "Your grandfather was a genius," Ashford said quietly. "This work, it's legitimate. It's original, and it's tragically unrecognized." He paused. "What was his name?" "Joseph Parker." "Joseph Parker," Ashford repeated, like he was memorizing it. "This proof alone would have earned him a PhD from any institution in the country. This is dissertation-level work. Beyond even—" He tapped the notebook. "Do you understand what you're sitting on? This isn't just family history. This is mathematical history." Isaiah felt his throat tighten. "I know. That's why I've been protecting it." "Protecting it?" Ashford raised an eyebrow. "Son, you need to be sharing it. Your grandfather's work deserves to be published, studied, and built upon. And you," he pointed at Isaiah, "you deserve to be recognized not as a viral video, but as a serious mathematician carrying on a legacy." "But how?" Isaiah asked. "I'm 19. I'm a sophomore. Who's going to take me seriously?" Ashford smiled. "Me. I'm going to take you seriously. And when I vouch for you, others will too." He leaned back in his chair. "Here's what I propose. We co-author a paper. We present your grandfather's original proof, provide historical context, and then we extend it, you and me together, to demonstrate that this work has ongoing relevance. We submit it to a top-tier journal. We will make sure Joseph Parker's name is in the academic record forever." Isaiah's heart was racing. This was more than he'd hoped for, more than he'd dreamed. "But," Ashford continued, his voice turning serious, "you need to understand what you're walking into. Publishing this paper, stepping into the academic world at your age, with this story attached, you're going to face scrutiny, doubt. People will question everything. Your age, your background, your legitimacy. Some of it will be veiled racism. Some of it will be blatant. Either way, it's coming. What would you do? Would you take the risk to honor a legacy knowing the cost? Tell me in the comments." Isaiah thought about his grandfather. A man who spent his entire life brilliant and invisible, who died without anyone knowing what he'd accomplished. He thought about his grandmother's words. He thought about that moment in the lecture hall when he decided to stop hiding. "I'll do it," Isaiah said. "Whatever it takes." Ashford nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Good. Then let's get to work." Over the next 3 weeks, Isaiah's life became a blur. He met with Professor Ashford twice a week, sometimes more. They worked through the proof line by line, verified every step, and extended the methodology to related problems. Ashford was a demanding teacher, but a brilliant one. He pushed Isaiah to think deeper, to articulate his reasoning with precision, to defend his conclusions. At the same time, the situation with Professor Hartwell was unraveling publicly. The university launched a formal investigation. More students came forward with stories of Hartwell's classroom behavior, comments that crossed lines, grading that seemed biased, a pattern of hostility towards students of color that had been ignored for years. Alumni pressure mounted, but not in the direction the university expected. Younger alumni, particularly alumni of color, demanded accountability. They threatened to withhold donations. They organized petitions. They made noise that couldn't be ignored. The university's PR team tried to control the narrative, but the story had taken on a life of its own. National news outlets covered it. Op-eds were written. Academic organizations issued statements. Isaiah's name was everywhere. And through it all, Isaiah kept working. While the world debated and argued and fought over what his story meant, he sat in libraries and offices, doing the actual work, proving that he belonged not because of a viral moment, but because of the equations he could solve and the legacy he was honoring. For weeks after that lecture hall confrontation, the university made an announcement. Professor Jonathan Hartwell was being placed on permanent administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. He would not be returning to the classroom. Isaiah read the announcement on his phone while sitting in the library. He felt nothing. Not satisfied. Not victory. Just tired. His grandmother called that evening. "Baby, did you see?" "I saw. You did that. You stood up and you made them see." "Grandma, I just solved an equation." "No, baby. You did more than that. You showed them that excellence can come from anywhere. That brilliance doesn't have a color or a zip code. You made them recognize your grandfather. You made them recognize you. Her voice cracked with emotion. I'm so proud of you. And your grandfather, wherever he is, he's proud too. Isaiah closed his eyes, feeling the weight of it all. The visibility, the vulnerability, the cost of being seen, but also the undeniable truth. Some things are worth the cost. Was justice actually served, or did the system just protect itself in a different way? The paper was submitted to the Journal of Advanced Mathematics in early November. Isaiah's name was listed as co-author alongside Professor Ashford with a dedication, in memory of Joseph Parker, whose unrecognized brilliance inspired this work. The submission process was agonizing. Waiting for peer review felt like waiting for a jury verdict. Every day, Isaiah checked his email obsessively. Professor Ashford remained calm, assured. Good work speaks for itself, he kept saying. Trust the process. But Isaiah knew the process wasn't neutral. He'd learned that lesson too well. In December, they received the reviews. The paper had been accepted. Not just accepted, praised. One reviewer called it a significant contribution to the field with profound historical implications. Another wrote, this work demonstrates the tragic consequences of systemic exclusion in academia and offers a roadmap for recognizing lost voices. The paper would be published in the spring issue. Isaiah's grandfather's name would be in a top-tier mathematics journal. The proof would be part of the permanent academic record. Isaiah called his grandmother the moment he got the news. She cried. He cried. His mother got on the phone and cried too. For a moment, none of the pain mattered. Only the triumph. But triumph, Isaiah was learning, was never simple. The publication announcement generated a new wave of attention. More interview requests. Speaking invitations. Universities reach out about graduate programs, offering full funding, prestigious fellowships. Isaiah was 19, barely halfway through his sophomore year, and institutions were courting him like he was a prize. Professor Ashford warned him, be careful. Everyone wants a piece of your story now. Make sure you're choosing paths that serve you, not paths that serve their narrative. Isaiah took that advice seriously. He declined most interviews. He ignored the documentary requests. He focused on his coursework, on his research with Ashford, on building his actual skills rather than his public profile. But the attention didn't stop. It morphed, evolved. Hit that subscribe button if you're invested in how Isaiah protects his future in a system that wants to consume his story. In January, Whitmore University made another announcement. They were establishing the Joseph Parker Memorial Scholarship for underrepresented students pursuing mathematics and STEM fields. Full tuition, housing, and a research stipend. The first recipient would be selected for the following academic year. The announcement included Isaiah's photo and a quote from Medine. Isaiah Parker's courage and excellence remind us of our mission to create equitable opportunities for all students. This scholarship honors his grandfather's legacy and our commitment to that mission. Isaiah read the announcement with mixed feelings. It was a good thing, undeniably good, but also felt like the university was using his grandfather's memory to rehabilitate their own image, turning a moment of exposed racism into a branding opportunity. He expressed this to Professor Ashford during one of their meetings. Ashford nodded knowingly. Institutions don't change because they have moral epiphanies. They change because they're forced to, and then they take credit for the change. He paused. But here's the thing, even if their motives are impure, if the result is that more students like you get opportunities, that's still a win. You take what you can get, and you keep pushing for more. Isaiah understood, but still left a bitter taste. In February, the university's investigation concluded. Professor Hartwell was officially terminated for cause. His tenure was revoked. The announcement cited repeated violations of the university's code of conduct, discriminatory behavior, and failure to uphold academic standards of respect and integrity. Hartwell filed a lawsuit against the university, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. The case would drag on for months, maybe years. But his academic career was over. No institution would hire him after this. Isaiah felt no satisfaction in that either. Destroying one man's career didn't fix the system. Hartwell was a symptom, not the disease. But the disease was harder to name, harder to fight. It lived in assumptions and biases, in who was given chances, and who had to fight for every inch of recognition. It lived in the fact that Isaiah's grandfather could be a genius and die unknown, while mediocre men with the right pedigree rose effortlessly. One evening in late February, Isaiah was walking across campus when someone called his name. He turned to see a freshman, a young black girl with her hair in braids, walking quickly to catch up with him. "Isaiah Parker?" she asked breathlessly. "Yeah, that's me." "Ay Malana. I wanted to thank you." Her eyes were bright, earnest. "I'm a math major. Freshman. And what you did, standing up, proving you belonged, it matters. My high school counselor told me not to bother with advanced math. Said I should focus on something more realistic. But I saw your story and I thought, screw that. If he can do it, so can I." Isaiah didn't know what to say. He'd never thought of himself as an inspiration. He'd just been trying to survive, to honor his grandfather, to solve the problems in front of him. "You got this," he told Alana. "Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are." She nodded, smiled, and walked away. Isaiah stood there for a long time, watching her go, feeling the weight of what he'd become without choosing it. A symbol, a story, an example. It was exhausting. But maybe, he thought, maybe it was also necessary. Could one person's fight change things for others? Or does the system just absorb the resistance and move on? Spring semester brought a strange kind of normalcy. Isaiah took his classes, worked with Professor Ashford on a follow-up research project, and tried to remember what it felt like to just be a student. But normal was a moving target now. He couldn't walk across campus without being recognized. Professors treated him differently, some with genuine respect, others with a kind of cautious deference that felt condescending. The Journal of Advanced Mathematics published the paper in March. The response from the academic community was overwhelmingly positive. Mathematicians around the world read Joseph Parker's proof, verified it independently, and marveled at its elegance. Several academics wrote response papers, building on the methodology, extending it to new problem domains. Isaiah's grandfather, 40 years after his death, became a recognized figure in mathematical history. Articles were written about him. Academic conferences mentioned his work. A small but growing movement emerged advocating for the recognition of lost mathematicians, brilliant minds who'd been excluded from academia due to racism, poverty, or systemic barriers. Isaiah received an email from a professor at MIT inviting him to present the paper at a symposium. Another invitation came from Stanford, then Cambridge. Suddenly, Isaiah Parker, 19-year-old sophomore from Eastwick, was being invited to speak at some of the most prestigious institutions in the world. Professor Ashford encouraged him to accept. "This is your moment. Use it, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you." Isaiah accepted the MIT invitation. In April, he took a train to Boston, staying with a cousin he barely knew, rehearsing his presentation until he could recite it in his sleep. The symposium was intimidating. A room full of PhDs, professors, researchers, people who'd spent decades in the field. And there was Isaiah, in a suit his mother had bought him for graduation, standing at a podium with a PowerPoint he'd assembled himself. He started talking, shaky at first, then finding his rhythm. He explained his grandfather's proof. He walked through the methodology. He showed how the approach could be extended to related problems. And as he spoke, he watched the faces in the audience shift from polite attention to genuine interest. When he finished, the applause was sincere. During the Q&A, a professor from Princeton asked a technical question that Isaiah answered confidently. A researcher from Cambridge asked about the historical context. A graduate student asked about Isaiah's plans for future research. Isaiah felt something he hadn't felt in months: competence. Not as a symbol or a story, but as a mathematician. Someone who belonged in this room because of the work, not the narrative. After the presentation, several people approached him. One of them was Dr. Michael Chun, a professor from Harvard. "Isaiah," Dr. Chun said, shaking his hand warmly. "That was excellent. Really impressive work. I wanted to ask, have you thought about where you'll pursue your graduate studies?" Isaiah blinked. "I'm still an undergraduate. I haven't." "I know, but it's never too early to think ahead. Harvard's math PhD program would be lucky to have you. I'd be happy to discuss it further if you're interested." More people came up. More conversations. more opportunities. By the end of the evening, Isaiah had business cards from 6 different universities, all expressing interest in recruiting him for graduate programs. What would it feel like to go from invisible to wanted by everyone? Comment below if you've ever experienced a moment when everything shifted. On the train back to Whitmore, Isaiah stared out the window at the passing landscape. He thought about the path he'd walked from that back row seat to this moment. He thought about his grandfather, working in isolation, never getting this recognition. He thought about Professor Hartwell, whose arrogance had accidentally set all of this in motion. He thought about Alana, the freshman who'd thanked him. About the Joseph Parker Memorial Scholarship. About the students who would come after him, who might have an easier path because of what he'd done. And he realized something. He wasn't angry anymore. Not at Hartwell. Not at the system. Not even at the circumstances that had kept his grandfather invisible. He was just determined. Determined to do the work. To honor the legacy. To be excellent not as an act of defiance, but as an act of inheritance. When Isaiah returned to campus, there was a letter waiting for him in his dorm mailbox. Handwritten envelope, no return address. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, written in shaky elderly handwriting. Dear Isaiah, my name is Margaret Hartwell. I am Professor Hartwell's mother. I saw what my son did to you. I saw the videos. I want you to know that I am ashamed. My son was raised better than that. His father and I taught him to respect all people, but somewhere along the way, he forgot, or he chose to forget. I cannot excuse his behavior, but I wanted to write to you to say, you are extraordinary. Your grace, your intelligence, your strength, it humbles me. Your grandfather would be so proud. I hope you can forgive an old woman for the sins of her son, and I hope you never stop being who you are. Sincerely, Margaret Hartwell. Isaiah read the letter 3 times. He folded it carefully and put it in his desk drawer next to his grandfather's notebooks. Some wounds heal. Some don't. But acknowledgement, real, genuine acknowledgement matters. Did the right people finally see what they needed to see, or was there still more to fight for? 2 years later, Isaiah Parker stood in a lecture hall at Whitmore University, but this time he wasn't in the back row. He was at the front, behind the podium, looking out at 75 students enrolled in Introduction to Number Theory. He was a senior now, 21 years old, serving as a teaching assistant for the course. Professor Ashford had recommended him for the position. The department had agreed enthusiastically. Isaiah looked at the faces staring back at him. Some are eager. Some are nervous. Some half asleep in the back row. He saw himself in all of them. Before we start today, Isaiah said, I want to tell you something. Math isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's not about proving you belong. It's about curiosity, persistence, the willingness to sit with a problem that seems impossible and try anyway. He paused, scanning the room. Some of you are going to struggle in this class. Some of you are going to doubt yourselves. Some of you are going to wonder if you're smart enough, if you belong here, if you made a mistake choosing this major. A few students nodded. They were already feeling it. Here's what I want you to know. Struggle doesn't mean failure. Doubt doesn't mean you don't belong. Everyone in this room, including me, has felt that way. What matters is what you do with that feeling. Isaiah opened his laptop and pulled up the first slide of his lecture. But before he started, he noticed a student in the back row, a young black guy, hoodie up, sitting alone, notebook open but blank. Isaiah caught his eye and nodded. The student nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. If you've made it this far, subscribe, because this is what happens when you refuse to stay invisible. And this channel is full of stories about people who changed everything by just showing up as themselves. After class, the student from the back row approached Isaiah. Hey, the student said. I'm Marcus. I wanted to say thanks for what you said. About struggling. About doubt. He hesitated. I'm from West Baltimore. First in my family to go to college. Sometimes I feel like I'm in over my head. Isaiah smiled. I know exactly how that feels. You do? Yeah. Idol. Isaiah pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo of his grandfather's notebooks. These belonged to my grandfather. He taught himself everything. Never got the chances we have. But he left me these, and they changed my life. Marcus stared at the photo. That's amazing. It is. But you want to know what's more amazing? You, being here. First in your family. Showing up every day, even when it's hard. Isaiah put his phone away. Don't waste energy doubting yourself. Use that energy to prove to yourself what you're capable of. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, I can do that. I know you can. And if you ever need help, if you're stuck on a problem or just need to talk, my office hours are posted. Come by. I will. Thanks, man. Marcus left. Isaiah watched him go, feeling a sense of purpose deeper than any academic achievement. This, helping students find their path, honoring his grandfather's legacy by lifting others, this was the work that mattered. That evening, Isaiah sat in his dorm room, the same room he'd lived in for 2 years now. His roommate Jason had graduated, and Isaiah had the place to himself. The walls were covered with mathematical posters, equations, and a framed copy of the published paper bearing his and his grandfather's names. His phone buzzed. A text from Professor Ashford. Congratulations. You've been accepted to Princeton's PhD program with full funding. They want you for fall 2026. We should talk tomorrow about your research trajectory. Isaiah stared at the message. Princeton. Full funding. A PhD program. The doors were opening one after another because he'd stopped hiding and started showing the world who he was. He thought about that lecture hall 2 years ago. The moment he stood up. The equation on the board. The choice to be visible. He thought about Professor Hartwell, whose career had ended but whose actions had accidentally catalyzed something bigger than both of them. He thought about his grandmother, who'd given him those notebooks and the wisdom to use them. He thought about his grandfather, whose brilliance had finally been recognized, whose name would live on in academic papers and scholarship programs, and the students who benefited from both. And he thought about the cost of visibility, the scrutiny, the pressure, the weight of being a symbol. It hadn't been easy. There were days when he missed being invisible, when he wished he could just blend into the background again. But his grandmother was right. Invisible wasn't living. It was just a slower kind of dying. Isaiah opened his laptop and started drafting an email to Professor Ashford, accepting the Princeton offer and proposing a research direction that would build on his grandfather's work. As he typed, he felt a sense of peace. Not because the fight was over. Not because the system was fixed. But because he'd found his place in it, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a mathematician, a teacher, a legacy keeper. Someone who'd stood up when it mattered. Someone who'd turned one humiliating moment into a lifetime of purpose. Someone who'd proven that excellence, when given the chance to show itself, cannot be denied. The chalk had shattered on that board 2 years ago. But from the pieces, something new had been built. Something lasting. Something true. And Isaiah Parker, sitting in his dorm room planning his future, knew one thing for certain. His grandfather's story, and his own, were just beginning. If this story moved you, if it made you think about who gets seen and who stays invisible, drop a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. And if you believe in stories where the truth wins, where courage matters, where one person standing up can change everything, stick around. Because there are so many more stories like this waiting to be told.